Thank you for joining us on the Authors Stage, an initiative highlighting writers and authors who call the Saratoga Springs, New York, and surrounding areas their home. I'm Trevor Oakley from the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and today I'm excited to be talking to the multiple National Book Award finalist, recipient of the Newbery Honor, Siebert Medal, and Siebert Honor, and Carter G. Woodson Book Awards, Steve Sheinkin, author of Fallout, Spies, Superbombs, and the Ultimate Cold War Showdown, published by Roaring Book Press, an imprint of Macmillan, and the winner of the American Library Association's Youth Media Award, Robert F. Siebert 2022 Honor for Distinguished Youth Nonfiction. Welcome, Steve, and thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Thanks for that nice intro there.
Hey, thank you.
Appreciate it.
So I'd love to just jump right in and kind of give you a chance to talk about, obviously, the creative process, and because that's what we're interested in today. So the simple question that might be the hardest one for some to answer is, where did the inspiration for this particular book come from?
Wow, you're absolutely right. It's a small, big question, because it's really more like, where does the inspiration to do this kind of stuff come from? And I write
exactly.
narrative nonfiction for kids and teens, and it's not. I never meant to. That's kind of a funny thing. I thought I was going to be writing comedies and comics and funny movies and things like that. So many twists and turns, as every writer has some version of, how they got there kind of thing. But I found myself, of all places, writing for textbook companies in my 20s into my 30s, and I hated it because history textbooks, come on. The worst. So I'm trying to make up for it. That's the short answer. I'm making amends. It's no good to say, hey, kids, history is cool. You have to, it's the classic, you have to show, you can't tell, you have to prove it. And so with something like Fallout, it's a spy thriller. It's the kind of book I love to read, and it can be fiction or nonfiction. People think of James Bond or John le Carré, they think of fiction, but often spy stories are just weirder and stranger and more surprising and higher stakes than fiction could ever be. And that's what I'm going for in Fallout. It's my take on a Cold War spy thriller, but it's all true.
So thinking about the other books that you've published, what about these topics has grabbed you, or what about a topic grabs you? Because when you look through different books, you've got the Port Chicago 50, you've got Bomb, you have Lincoln's Grave Robbers. I mean, in each of these stories, there's elements of notoriety, injustice, interesting, weird history. Just lots of unthinkable. That this happened, or yes, this could happen here, kinds of things.
Yeah.
So what is it about a thing that you say, oh my gosh,
you're onto something? Yeah, I mean it's part of untold history or incompletely, lamely told history. And that goes back to, it's not coincidence that when I started doing this kind of stuff, I just was able to begin with stuff they wouldn't let me put in textbooks, which is anything good, basically. Whether that means funny, gross, controversial, morally confusing or ambiguous, all the things that make stories interesting. Yeah, the first narrative nonfiction book I wrote for this kind of middle grade audience was about Benedict Arnold, and I just thought, one of the great wasted stories. I mean, if he's in textbooks is this much, and they say he's a traitor. Yep. That's the only thing that's ever going to be on a test. That's all you need to know. And yet I think he's the original American loose cannon action hero. This archetype of a Hollywood movie way before Hollywood, obviously. Yeah, and
almost an anti-hero in some ways too, because he felt that he just kept getting wronged every step of the way, or he did this and he wasn't recognized for his achievements, or felt that. And
so that's it. I mean, whether it's from the Revolution to a civil rights story to World War II science story, I'm looking for that stuff that got left out, that makes history interesting, but I really don't want extra credit for it. I don't want it to be perceived as health food. That's really, if there's one thing I'm trying to do, and who knows if I'm ever going to achieve, progress on this, and it's not just me, but trying to get nonfiction out of the health food section.
The sneaking the vegetables into the cupcakes kind of thing.
It's really not. And so I just think the stories have to stand on their own as great stories. But it has that element, like you said, of these are the things that were left out of the curriculum, usually because they were too complicated or because they didn't tell the story of America that certain interest groups want to be told.
Right. Were any of those things that were left out, any particular things that you remember writing into those textbooks that then your publisher said, oh no, that's too much, no, and you said, but that's the crux of the whole
Again, there's
event
so
right
much.
here.
I mean, there's so many stories that I put in that they cut out, and that became my slow motion light bulb kind of moment where I said, wait a minute, this is all so good, you know, and yeah, if we get into that, that's all we'll talk about. But Arnold is a good example, and a textbook editor I worked for, this guy, Nick, he said, you know, I was just annoying, saying, why can't I tell this story? It's so good. He said, well, you know, Benedict Arnold makes people nervous. And I had to further annoy him to find out what he meant, but he meant that there's that moral ambiguity there, that he was a good guy because he was a hero, but he was also a villain. Yeah. And we were writing a book for fifth graders, and he was saying, well, that's, you know, it wasn't him who thought this, but somebody somewhere is going to be offended by that and say, you have to make it clear who the good guys and the bad guys are. And if you're not dealing with the reality that people who founded our country did good and terrible things at the same time, then you're certainly not teaching American history. I don't know what you are teaching.
And that worry about offending, somebody somewhere is going to be offended, then everybody, publishing should just shut its doors. Media should shut its doors. I mean, that's the impossibility. So with narrative nonfiction then, so because especially the style lends itself to the great storytelling, you know, smooth storytelling, exciting storytelling, how do you incorporate and rework the people and events to share with your audience, you know, young readers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that circuitous path I took really paid off, because the first thing, my brother and I, when we were in our early 20s, well, actually we started this when we were in junior high, we said we're going to be a brother filmmaking, a movie making team. So we spent many years taking film classes and writing and then making our own low budget movies that never did anything, you know, financially or critically, if we're honest about it, you know. But man, those lessons. It's really true. You never waste. A failure is the best thing that can happen.
Oh, absolutely.
So I approach it, you know, I do the research, you have to do that. But then there is a lot of creativity in it, because you can give a group of, I do this sometimes in classes, I'll give a group of students, you know, a page of facts and quotes and details, and let's write a one-page story about this, and everybody does it differently. So my approach is very much out of that filmmaking world. I do storyboards. They always teach you to, this is very 20th century, but they'll teach you to put all your best scenes on index cards.
Yep.
And put them up on a wall, which I do in my office. And then use that as your backbone, as almost an outline for your story. And so when I'm researching, I'm looking for those scenes, those cinematic, exciting moments where we have enough sources where I can really create dialogue and tension and all the elements of a really good scene. And once I find enough of those in the research, then I know it'll work. You know, and then there's still the hard work of some of the connecting background information and of course the revising. But if I can find just enough of those really cool scenes to pull you through the beginning,
it's like
middle.
Things kind of start to coalesce, and it sounds like it happens almost organically, where these details are kind of gravitating toward one another, and you say, okay, there's something there. And then you got linking that connective tissue.
Connective tissue is a good way to put it. Yeah,
cool.
and I put that in last because I want there to be just enough of that background information so that you don't have to know anything about the Cold War, for instance, going into it, but it's mostly a really downhill, fast-paced story.
Can you share with us anything that you recall editing out of Fallout, or anything else that might jump out at you that you had to edit out of another manuscript that you're either really glad that you left out, or maybe even had to radically rework, or something that you really wish that you had kept in the final product, and then how was that decision made? You're like, choosing between babies.
Yeah, we all have those kinds of stories. For a book called Bomb that I wrote, which is about the science and spying in the Manhattan Project during World War II, I wrote a draft, and it had a bunch of storylines, really science scenes, spying scenes, kind of commando, secret agent scenes. And my favorite chapter of all, it was called The Getaway, because that's what it was. It was these Norwegians went behind enemy lines and blew up a factory the Germans were using in their atomic bomb research. Really, you could argue, changed the course of history.
Yeah.
So it's not well known in the US, but it was, all right, so I had that action. It was really good. And then I had a chapter called The Getaway, which was, you guessed it, how they got away. I mean, what do you do when 10,000 Nazis are chasing you? Well,
run like heck,
It's an Indiana Jones movie,
Yes.
And of course they were on cross-country skis, because why not,
Again, very James Bond, very
exactly,
Norwegian.
Very James Bond. And it was it was only, we're talking about less than 1,500 words. So what, 4 pages in a book like this?
Yep.
And I loved it. It was just nonstop action adventure. And my editor put a note on the side of the manuscript. She always starts with something, this is really great action, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of off track. We've seen what they've done now. Let's get back to Los Alamos. Let's get back to Washington, Moscow. I'd cut it. That was the last phrase. I'd cut. And that basically meant we're cutting it.
Yeah, okay.
But we can go back and forth about it, and you can complain about it and all that. And I did. It's just a good example because I absolutely think she was right.
Okay.
It's something that you can know intellectually. Each time you start a project, you still have to relearn it, that you can cut something really good. That almost doesn't matter how good. And what's left could be better.
Yeah.
And that's counterintuitive, but as I say, you should always keep that stuff, because when we did a paperback edition of Bomb, we put there's a deleted scene in the back.
Oh, cool.
So if you check that out, it's just there, like, with movies. And I love watching deleted scenes and trying to figure out.
I do too, yeah.
Why was it cut? It's almost always simply to keep the story flowing faster. So, and that was her point. She was right.
Okay.
I was a big baby about it, but I can admit it now.
Throughout all this, and then, because it's a lot to get to hear. How do you strike a balance between making demands on your readers versus taking care of them or guiding them through the reading experience?
That's a very kind of editor question.
Oh,
actually.
thanks.
I
Wow.
mean, we could be at a writers' conference and talk about that, because it's so true. But yeah, I do write. I want my stories to be complicated, and they push it a little bit. And I don't know if we want to talk about reviews and all of that, but sometimes I'll get that in reviews. These kids aren't going to be able to follow this story. And those are always the books that do the best, by the way.
Of course, people underestimate, man. They underestimate young readers constantly.
And the kids never say that. It's only adults who say that.
Exactly, yeah.
But another editor phrase, I had an editor who said, sometimes you got to do a little hand-holding. And that's exactly what she meant. She said, you love to throw the reader into this. And I never start with a dump of information about it. It was 1945, and here's what's going on, because that's killer.
Yeah, it is.
So, but at some point, you've got to step back and give that context and say, here's what you need to know. And this goes for people call it world building in fiction, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And getting that balance right is definitely the hardest part of the job. If I had an easy way to explain it, I would just tell you, and give away the secret. And maybe other writers do, but to me, it's just trial and error. And I write. That's why I start with the scenes that I know work, that are going to be exciting, and then reluctantly put in the background information, and then kind of try to polish it into something smooth. But I've found that it doesn't happen organically in the writing process. Maybe it does for some people.
Either way, I'm in awe of anybody that can do that. So thank you.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Can you share with us any details about something you're working on right now, even if it's another creative pursuit that may not be literary?
Well, I will. I mean, the book thing that'll be the next thing that anyone sees from me will be a graphic novel, actually, which is important to me, just in terms of I love comics and graphic novels. I love to draw, and I've written graphic novels that I've drawn. My very first book that I ever wrote, not the widest known book of all times, but it's called The Adventures of Rabbi Harvey.
Oh, I know I know that book. All right.
And it's about a crime-fighting rabbi in the Wild West, and that was born, from my way back in my Hebrew school days, reading Jewish folk tales. And so it had to be me drawing it because it was just my own creation. And then when I did my very first book, I drew pictures in it because I wanted there to be, I mean, history book that is, I wanted there to be kind of comics in it. And when it was picked up by a publisher, the guy said, now we're going to hire a much better artist to do all the art.
Okay,
said,
thank you.
Yeah, all right, I guess. I mean, at that point, you're desperate to have a real book, real quote book. So,
Yeah.
so for the graphic novel, I've written a few of them now, and the first one that will be out will be about Bomb. It will be a graphic novel adaptation of Bomb, which is so full circle because writing that is almost no different from writing a film script.
Yeah.
You're writing, what you see on a screen-sized panel and what you hear.
Yeah. And
it was really fun, and it also allowed me to cross the line in ways you can't in narrative nonfiction, which is to write dialogue. And I used bits and pieces of dialogue we know, but I then use that jumping off point of what would Robert Oppenheimer say in that situation. That's really fun, to create those tense dialogue duels, that sort of stuff. And then hand it off to a really, really good artist. And it just takes a while. That's the thing. The writing is the easy part for a graphic novel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the art is just, it's so labor intensive. Each page is just, it's almost a work of art.
So because again, like you said, it looks kind of like a screenplay. So it's,
Yeah.
Very dialogue heavy. Do you provide the notes for the artists?
Yes.
Or how does that collaboration work?
It's almost like, you're almost writing in a little bit of direction, close up here, and then pull back, and we see this, and then I also sent, my files, because just visually I like to see things when I'm writing. The term visual learner hadn't been invented yet when I was in school, but man, it would have saved a lot of trouble if people
my goodness.
figured out that's what I was. But and I was able to send all that to the artist too, and that was because it's not just people walking and talking. There's scenes in science labs, battle scenes, scenes in famous locations, crowds. There's a lot of research goes into the visual side of all that. So I so admire that people who can bring that to life visually. It's 250 pages, so it's a monumental. Every time I read it, I get tired. On behalf of the artist.
So, I know there are working and aspiring writers in our audience. So, can you talk to us about your writing process, which you did a little bit already? So, whether you have a specific routine, maybe a time of day you like to write, or how you warm up or flex the literary muscle, or any other advice that you can share with our writers out there.
Yeah, I'm a big collector of advice too, but I've realized at this point that it's all basically the same.
Oh, cool.
Writing advice. So, but it's just about sitting down and working, but in terms of the time, you really do have to make that your thing. If you're lucky enough to have a big chunk of time in the middle of the day, and I didn't always. I used to, of course, have actual jobs, and I'm really lucky that I don't right now. But when I first moved to Saratoga, I worked in the library every day. So that's how I got to know Trevor.
All right,
Because I was literally there. I had a little table, which I considered my table.
Yep.
and I went there the whole day. The work, normal, typical work day from the morning to the afternoon. And it doesn't have to be in any particular place, but that really helped me because I wasn't sitting at home. It just helped to go somewhere and feel like I was going to work. And of course, it helps to have a deadline, whether that's self-imposed or not. When you're doing a book like what I work on, it really ends up being about half and half research and writing. Mm-hmm. So I'll kind of budget out, all right, I'll allow myself, at least for starters, say 6 months to read and take notes and travel and do interviews and all of that stuff. And then by that point, I really should I've got to cut myself off and start making that outline and start kind of moving stuff over from notes to some kind of really rough draft. I think that's by far the hardest part of the process is writing that first draft. Yeah. Especially the beginning, because you have, I'm writing a spy thriller. You have an idea of what it should sound like, and then you start to write, and it's just is lame or flat.
The tone is off. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have the action and the edge that you had in your mind. Of course, and that's what I've learned. When I say people give repetitive advice, it's actually very helpful advice. It's just that happens to everyone.
Okay.
And with the first draft, it just never comes out as cool as you think it's going to. And that's okay, because it's true of everybody. You got to work through that. Get it down. Even a bad first draft is so valuable to get it down. Don't stop. Don't ask a lot of advice when you're, at that point.
Yeah.
Don't think I need to read one more book, or I need one more piece of inspiration. You don't. You just keep going and get it down. And it's amazing how quickly you can improve something once you have it down and give yourself a moment to step back. And
that was explained to me once by somebody. I was writing an article, and the first draft that I turned in, and pretty much got back lots of, it was dismal. And I said, this is the throw up draft. Everything else from here, you got the junk out, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then, take from here, move on. And I've never forgotten that. So yeah, the throw up draft, you just have to sit down and write. It's part of the advice. How do you write? Start writing.
To start,
and
absolutely.
Then,
don't overthink it. Yeah, I mean, I love showing, when I go to school, that's a big part of my job, is talking in schools, and I'll show slides of my editor's comments on it. And they'll say, kids, it looks like you got a C on that, at best, at best. And I love showing that, because they relate. So don't you this moment when you get something back from a teacher, and I love to say, do you ever, all right, well, show of hands, do you ever get something back from your teacher and it's filled with notes like this? And did you ever say, hey, thanks, this is so great, now I can do it again? And no, usually there's like one kid,
Yeah.
But I say, you should, because it's so much easier.
Yeah.
So much easier.
It is so weird that's how we do it. We almost demand, this has to be right the first time. Yeah. Or the first time you submit it for some kind of, adjudication, it's got to be as perfect as can be. And wow, that's not how that all works in the real world at all. And it's kind of strange. That's how we're conditioned. And then
it helped me so much to know that so many really successful writers, at least secretly, privately, say the same thing. Probably publicly too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm a librarian, so forgive me for indulging here, but do you have a favorite memory about a particular library or librarian or teacher over the years? Someone that might have maybe got you, or maybe you just got in trouble a lot with that person?
No. I have lots of good, fond library memories. And you know about my love of the Saratoga Library.
I do.
And how important that was.
Thank you for it.
Yeah, I wrote all of, at least Bomb, and maybe some of the next book too, right there in that little tiny my table, as I call it. Other people don't sit there now. I guess that's okay.
We don't talk about that. It's fine,
But yeah, going way back to Mrs. Turk in elementary school, focusing on what I wanted to read. Not about whether it was a boy book or a girl book, or what kind of book it was, or you like that, and then maybe you want to check that out. And it's kind of funny when I think back about what I liked, because if you had asked me, do you like history? I'd say, it's boring, no. But I loved kind of adventure stories that took place in history.
Right.
Whether it was something like Treasure Island, or Mutiny on the Bounty, or great train robbery, things like that. I loved. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know this is this certain type of historical fiction.
But that's so cool. You didn't need to know.
No,
you didn't have to classify it yet.
Exactly.
What do you like? I just like stuff.
Yeah,
that's all
I like
that matters.
this kind of stuff. Yeah. Oh, then you might like this. And librarians are so essential for that kind of thing.
Thank you. And then here's the fun one. Do you ever Google yourself or check mentions on social media or read online reviews? And if so, do you have any favorite or memorable results or posts?
I used to do it pretty obsessively, just because, it's a big thing if you're trying for years, like every writer, in the wilderness, and then you got a review or something like that. And now I'm not allowed to look anymore.
Okay.
Is the rule that my wife Rachel looks, and she'll tell me if there's something I need to see. or react to. Like, you know, there was one book I wrote that where someone, I guess it was a Goodreads thing, it was just some, you know, within our little world, prominent place, where they said, I think he's, you know, crossing the line. I think he's making things up here. How does he know that this person smiled when that other person came into the room? And I actually had stuff like that is useful to know, and I was able to go online and because you don't usually want to respond to, gee, I'm sorry you didn't enjoy my book. You know, you don't want that. But if it's something like that, you can show some evidence that, and that was early enough in my career where I really felt that I had to do that. So I guess it's good to know about things like that. When a new book comes out, my editor will send me the reviews as they come in.
Right.
And I just want to know, basically good or bad.
Yeah.
And I'll just skim them to look for certain words, you know, certain things. And I only really read the bad ones, because if it's good, I just, that's fine. But if it's bad, man, I got to read the whole thing, and then it's terrible. You shouldn't do this, by the way.
Well, are there any bad ones that are particularly fun? And I'm not asking you to remember them if you don't, but just in some way, could it be just something that's so kind of off the wall that you say, wow, that's a good one. Save that for the funny file. I'll save that for family gatherings and, you know, and library conferences and whatnot.
Yeah, there are some like that, and especially if you go to places like Amazon and Goodreads, which you shouldn't, by the way, but
right.
Then you'll get people who are just offended by something really basic. Like the very, very first history nonfiction book that I wrote was, I literally took all the stories from my textbook world that they wouldn't let me put in textbooks about the American Revolution. And the book was called King George, What Was His Problem? And it was a goof. It was meant to be irreverent, you know?
Yeah. And
it was all about the funny and gross things that happened in the American Revolution. And man, that got a lot of one-star reviews because people were offended. Well, you can't have George Washington in his underwear, you know, and stuff, just stupid stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if you're just offended by the basic premise that history can be funny and that the heroes can be fools, or do funny things even, man.
We are funny like that, where we elevate people, you know, persons through history, or, you know, persons people of note, you know, kind of get this superhuman, you know, status. And yeah, they're, you know, we'd think in their underpants, no, they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, they could never do that. Yeah, right.
Okay,
that
all
would
right.
Never happen. Yeah, yeah, anytime we can undermine that, I think that's a good
fun.
thing. Yeah, but it's not always appreciated. So.
Finally, if you could describe or define yourself in just one word, what would it be?
Curious?
Curious. I love
go
it.
With that word.
Cool.
Yeah, that's what keeps me going anyway.
Yeah.
You know, with this, because I love to just start a project without actually knowing that much about it. You know, about the event that I'm writing about, which seems wrong, but yeah, I could never run out of things to write about, just because there's so much to be curious about.
And the beautiful thing is, it's not like you're performing, you know, you're not going into a potentially hazardous chemistry experiment without any foreknowledge. So you're not going to wreak total havoc on the world. You know, you're going to wreak a happy havoc somewhere else with your curiosity and experimentation.
That's a very important distinction.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I really mean that. And so can you tell us, where can people find you online and or in real life? And most importantly, where can people find your work?
Yeah. My website is just my name, stevesheinkin.com, and all the, you know, Twitter as well. And the only other thing I'd point to people toward is that I've been doing this little kind of book game show on YouTube, a very nerdy book game show. It's a very pandemic-inspired thing where, since we were all inside on Zoom, I said, I'm going to just call up author friends, and it's going to be called Author Fan Face-Off. One author who's well-known in the children's world, and a kid, and they're going to go head-to-head on questions from one of the author's books.
So cool.
And you'll be amazed at or maybe you won't, because you know how generous children's book authors are. You'll be at the people who have done it, just all the big names. It's just, that's been my favorite project of the last couple of years.
They're a real good time. So yeah, tons of fun. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor.
I'm Trevor Oakley, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon. So be sure to read something good today.